Hello, hi. So I feel sorry for you guys having to listen to, you know, someone whose English is not so great, but I will try my best. My name is Khaled Barakat, and I'm a Palestinian. I was born in Palestine, raised in Palestine. I was born after 1967 occupation in a village in the West Bank, about 7 kilometers north of Jerusalem. And, you know, it is really important to realize that when you're born under an occupation or colonization, and I know that the indigenous native population in nations in Canada understand this very well and relate to this very well, is that you are under a power that doesn't understand anything about you, your language, your culture, your relationship to the land. They don't understand how rooted you are in this land, and they don't understand the social structure of your society, and how your relationship also to the environment and the surroundings. So because colonization and occupation have one major reason, and that is expansion and theft and plunder and hegemony. Occupation doesn't happen for no reason. Colonization happens for reasons, and native and indigenous and national liberation movements around the world understand this very well. And if I can claim that the vast majority, if not all, national liberation movements around the world have met colonizers with some kind of let's negotiate, let's talk, let's have peace. At the early stages of colonization, before people resolve to arms and to violence, and before people take that path of liberating their land with their own hands, because people, they exploit all possibilities, and they find that the colonizers is not interested in peace, and they're not interested in negotiating. They're interested in making this nation slaves, that they work in their factories, they build their roads, they serve the masters in their houses, they become slaves for colonizers and occupiers. And so the reaction of people is naturally resistance. Resistance is a very natural thing to do. If you don't resist, something is wrong with you. Somebody comes and take your land and take your house and confiscate your life, and you don't resist, that's a problem. So resistance is existence. It becomes that's how you exist. And I remember when I first went to school, the first grade, my friend told me that there's the Star of David in our books, and we should, so you see all Palestinian children taking the first page of their notebooks, because it has the military council and the civil administration with the Star of David, which meant for us the Israeli occupation. That's what it means for Palestinians. So the first act as a child is that you do that, because, and I was really touched by the comrade, comments about his grandmother, is because I remember my grandmother also not just telling me that the land is occupied, but every time we take the bus, she refused to pay, because this bus was a Palestinian bus for her one time, and now it's being taken, so we will not, she never paid the bus fees. She'll fight with the driver. You know, from that to, you know, to be able to go to Jerusalem and pray, to every little thing that matters for her is a form of resistance. So resistance starts with colonization. The very first day of occupation is the birth of resistance in any land that a native indigenous population find itself under colonization. And it starts with individual resistance, not organized. It starts with, you know, initiatives by people, by villagers, by workers, and then it formulates itself with experience under occupation in a national liberation movement that is organized with very defined goals, very defined vision, not just for you know, the political vision or political speech or discourse of this national liberation movement, but it touches, you know, the students, so, and the labor movement, and women and children, from kindergarten all the way to the military resistance, is one national liberation movement that is, every component of it is important. And the reason I'm talking about this is because they call national liberation movements and organizations who carry armed struggle, they call them terrorists because they say that they use means of violence. And that if they don't use violence and don't carry arms, then, you know, we'll negotiate with them, or then there will be a solution, or, you know, that. But in the history of humanity, there has never been a case in which the colonizer voluntarily, you know, took an initiative and say, you know, I'm gonna respond to this peace initiative. Maybe, yeah, we should get along. And, you know, you're making sense here. In fact, you know, the US didn't have a problem with anybody having weapons as long as this weapon is directed to somebody the United States doesn't like. But if any arm is directed against the occupier, then that's terrorism immediately. And terrorism is to say that you don't have a cause, that a terrorist without a cause, they're just born terrorists, they're violent, they're savages, they're barbaric, they're extremists, they don't want to, you know, go along with the program. They're rebels, they're, you know, all these names is to actually say that you don't have a cause, which means that you don't have rights. And it's really important to also realize that when they say that, they want to strip you from your cause, from, you know, and it's not hard to actually differentiate between a terrorist group and a national liberation movement. It's very easy. It's not hard or complicated as they try to convince us. All you have to do is, especially in today's world, right? I mean, with all this, you know, ability for people to go and check in for themselves and read and educate themselves, and kind of, you know, you'll be able to tell if a group is massacring people left and right, humiliating people, racist, you know, killing, they don't have a vision, you know, they're puppets for a regime or some kind, or, yeah, that's a terrorist group. But all these groups that these things applies on them are supported by the United States. But the national liberation movements are being called terrorists, and they are not supported by the United States. And we all know that the US have armed the groups in Afghanistan to the teeth, including arming them with weapons such as stingers, anti-aircraft, missiles, very high sophisticated missiles to fight the Russians. A week later, they became terrorists because they don't serve the United States interest anymore. So we know all this BS. And we know that the use of this pressure of terrorism is to actually force nations to give up rights, concessions, and to give in, and to accept what is being offered. I'll give you 3 examples from the Palestinian experience, very quick. I mean, the first encounter with the Europeans was 1799, when, Palestinians, they find out, they wake up one day and they saw the French, military warships advancing towards Palestine, the city of Acre, and immediately they resisted the French colonization or attempt of colonizing Palestine, and they couldn't colonize the city of Acre, and they left after 3 months of siege. They went and occupied Egypt. They couldn't occupy the city of Akka. They occupied Egypt. But there was a resistance, for any, French attempts to colonize Palestine. But the 3 examples, very quick, I'll give you, is that Palestine fall under the colonization of the British in 1917. From 1917 until 1936, Palestinians didn't have an armed movement. It was only when this man who came from Syria, actually, he is not Palestinian, but he was the Imam of the Independence Mosque in Haifa, and he was the one who led the Great Revolution between 1936 and 1939 in Palestine. Now, his name is Al-Qassam, and this is the name that later on the Hamas movement used to describe, to name their military wing after, Al-Qassam. Al-Qassam, with his men, fought for these 3 years, and also it was combined with the longest general strike in the history of humanity. 6 months general strike daily in Palestine. There was a real popular resistance from all sectors of the society, from students, from women, and actually there was a secret movement of women, Palestinian women, who carried on guns and participated in the revolution in also various different forms and ways. And every Tuesday, the British will hang one of our leaders, and execute them. But the Palestinian people were able to carry on their struggle for 3 years until the revolution was not crushed, but it was ended because of false promises that some leaders in the movement accepted by the British, is that if you lay down your arms and you come to London and we negotiate, then everything is going to be okay. And the Palestinian armed resistance movement was crushed immediately after that. And Palestinians never got a thing from London. It was false promises. And the other example, and this, by the way, led to the occupation of Palestine, led for the Zionist terrorist organizations that was operating in Palestine to be more stronger and more able to inflict harms on Palestinians and committing massacres that led later on to the genocide and the ethnic cleansing of 2/3 of the population that became refugees. The second experience is the phenomena of Palestinian resistance in 1965 up until 1972, when Palestinians decided that as the world is not paying attention to our cause, the Israeli occupation is doing what it's doing, the world is watching, and the world doesn't even know about this, then we need to actually carry our struggle into different areas, not just in Palestine, but to practice certain tactics, resistant tactics, that can bring Palestine into the world scene, and that nations will start asking, what is Palestine? What is the Palestinians? Who are the Palestinians? What do they want? And that's when the hijacking of airplanes started it by Palestinians, is to actually address this question. And when you study these military, well-calculated operations, you will realize that no one was killed at the hand of the Palestinian fighters. In fact, it was a chance for Palestinian fighters. Any Palestinian fighter who carry on an operation has to speak English or French in order to talk to people, because the idea was to actually talk about Palestine and bring Palestine into the world scene. And now, in retrospect, you can say, well, some of these tactics, were right, some of these tactics were wrong. You can always evaluate that, but the entire Palestinian movement have said that this will be a tactical operations for a certain period of time to achieve a specific goals. Not because Palestinian revolutionaries are interested in, terrorizing innocent people. And this was a movement by led by Dr. Wadi Haddad, who's a medical doctor, and who is later was assassinated by the Israeli intelligence service in 1976. So in the Palestinian National Liberation Movement from 1936 until today, you always have these two trends. A trend that says, let's negotiate and see what can come out. And another trend that says we need to resist and continue the resistance until the liberation of Palestine. And it doesn't mean that it is wrong to negotiate. Sometimes a national liberation movement finds itself in a position where we can negotiate and come out with, real real results. It's not a taboo to negotiate with your enemy. But in the situation of Palestine and in the conditions that surrounds Palestinian struggle, we see that negotiations is nothing but a failure and illusionist path that will never lead anywhere. It didn't lead us anywhere in 36. It didn't lead us anywhere when the PLO leadership in 1974 accepted, the state, Palestinian state, and not the liberation of the entire land of Palestine and the talk of just a Palestinian state. The last thing I want to say, and I end with this, is that the reason that Palestinian struggle is continuing for the last 100 years is not because of, of the Palestinian, just the Palestinian resilience and the Palestinian resistance, history and experience, but it also because of the people's support for the resistance, because this is a resistance that belongs to the people and not to a political party or a group or a person. And that as individuals, we're just passing passing through the life of the Palestinian people, because the Palestinian people is what's going to remain and protect their cause until they achieve their rights with all means necessary and legitimate and possible in their position. Thank you.